Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is April 19. Over the last several days and even weeks, we've been reading about King David. We've been reading about this man who is often described as a man after God's heart. There are several places in Scripture where this description is given of David. And because of that, that gets our interest, and we start to ask questions like this. What is it that is so unique about David? What is it that makes David a man after God's heart? Because after all, isn't that what we are all interested in? I would love to be considered a man after God's heart. Wouldn't you like to be considered the same way by your friends and neighbors and coworkers? Of course we would. That's important to each of us as we strive to live lives that please God. So again, we ask the question, why is David a man after God's heart? We've seen that David is certainly not perfect. We've seen his sin with Bathsheba. We've seen him completely lose control of himself during that brief interim. We've seen him even resort to murder in order to cover his tracks, so to speak. We've seen David have trouble within his own family, one of his own sons even rebelling against him and creating a conspiracy against his kingship. We've seen multiple issues. What is it that makes David a man after God's heart? One of the clearest ways we see into the heart of David, like maybe no other character in Scripture, is we have the Psalms. David writes a number of Psalms, and these Psalms are a way for us to sort of peel back the curtain, to see David's interior self, to see his heart, to see his vulnerabilities, to see his fears, to see his doubts, to see his strengths, to see his weaknesses, to see his love for the Lord, and to see his despair. All of these emotions are run throughout the Psalms. As a matter of fact, we've already read several of those Psalms that give us an indication of David's heart. Because, for example, after the sin with Bathsheba and resorting to having Uriah killed, David, when confronted with his sin by Nathan, writes Psalm 51. It's one of the most gut-wrenching psalms in all of Scripture because we see David just completely opening himself up to God, begging for forgiveness. David is very, very penitent, and you can hardly read that psalm without feeling the emotion and maybe even shedding a tear, because we've all been there, haven't we? David is so honest with himself, with his emotions, and with his God. We've seen already David write psalms to God when he's running for his life and afraid. We've seen David write psalms when he's celebrating the return of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, for example. And so again, the Psalms are going to allow us to see a wide range of emotions, many of which we will certainly be able to understand because we've had similar feelings ourselves. So today, in today's reading and in several readings to come, we are going to be spending some time in the Psalms. We're going to be reading a large bulk of the Psalms, and the editor of this particular Bible we are using for our daily Bible reading is explaining to us that he's going to arrange these Psalms topically, and he's going to arrange them in probably 5 different groupings. So today, for example, we start with a section that he has entitled Psalms of the Troubled Soul. Now, before we start to talk about these specific Psalms, let me just say something about singing. Singing is now and has always been a vital part of human worship centered toward God. And there's a reason for that. There's something very special about singing. We as Christians are really never given an option of whether to sing or not sing. We are actually commanded to sing and to make melody in our hearts to God. But there's something about singing that's a significant part of our worship because it's useful in aiding our memory. For example, when certain scripture texts are put to music and we sing them, they are much easier for us to remember and memorize that particular scripture. We use songs when we teach our children. Why do we do that? Because something about linking messages or facts with music causes them to be lodged into the brain just a little bit deeper and held on to just a little bit longer. Another interesting thing about singing is it soothes our fears. Whenever we're worried, whenever we're anxious, singing helps bring calm to a troubled soul, as we'll see in the Psalms today and in the days to come. We also know that singing prevents anger, or maybe I should say it calms anger, because it's really hard, have you noticed, to be angry and to be singing at the same time. So there's a valuable place, not just in worship, but in our lives for singing. It's a very important part of the emotional experience as a human being. So having said all that, we start to look at these Psalms today. First, we see Psalm 5, which is described as a prayer for protection of the righteous. In this psalm, I love what David says when he says, I lay out my requests and I wait in expectation. That's a motto that each of us as Christian people should be following. Every morning I get up and I lay out my requests before God, and then I wait eagerly in expectation, knowing that God has not only heard me, but God will also answer my prayers. In Psalm 6, we see David praying for deliverance from his enemies. He understands that he's got some challenges before him, and he doesn't want to face those challenges without God being on his side. Psalm 7 today shows us a prayer for refuge from enemies. And in this psalm, I noted these words, O righteous God, who searches minds and hearts, bring to an end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous secure. My shield is God Most High, who saves the upright in heart. David finds confidence in God. David rejoices in that confidence he feels. And in the same way, we can even today read a psalm like this one and feel that same level of confidence when we face difficult situations and difficult people. In Psalm 10, we have a prayer for relief from oppression by the wicked. This is one of those psalms where it appears that the wicked are winning, where it seems like those who are going against God are being successful, and those who are trying to be righteous are being punished. And David simply prays for a flip of that script. He prays that God will honor the righteous and punish the wicked. And there's even more of that in the next psalm, the final psalm we read today in Psalm 11. This one is entitled Security of the Righteous from Threats of the Wicked. And I want to close our time together today by reminding you of that last half of Psalm 11 in our reading, where David writes, The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. He observes the sons of men. His eyes examine them. The Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked and those who love violence, his soul hates. Oh, on the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur. A little reminiscent of Sodom, remember? On the wicked he will rain fiery coals and burning sulfur. A scorching wind will be their lot. For the Lord is righteous. He loves justice. Upright men will see his face. David finds confidence in knowing that ultimately, maybe not immediately, God will reward the righteous, and he will ultimately punish those who are wicked. We find great confidence in knowing that God sees all of this. And remember, the story is not about David's despair or longing, nor is it about our despair and longing today. The story is and always has been about a God who is sovereign over all his creation, who loves his creation, and who has everything under control. So today we simply find confidence in knowing that God's will be done, and God's will is what's best. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.